I will try to entertain you and have some fun myself. Okay, this on the left is Ganesh. That's before they didn't know where to start. It's a Hindu god of new beginnings. And the fellow on the right is Ranjan. In 1895, 8th November, he discovered X-rays. He didn't invent X-rays. X-rays are present normally in nature also. In fact, the entire electromagnetic spectrum, the most important source is sun. Sun produces radio waves, from radio waves to gamma and cosmic rays. Most of the harmful radiation gets filtered in the upper few layers of the atmosphere and very few reach the surface of the earth. Sun does it mostly by heating things at such a high temperature that atoms don't exist. It's just plasma. It's protons, neutrons and nuclei, and they are in a very fast random motion. What produces electromagnetic radiation is actually movement of charge. And Ranjan, we should be thankful to him. All of us, especially the radiologists, are earning our daily bread because of this guy. And he got his Nobel Prize in Physics in 1901, 6 years after he discovered X-rays. He did not get it patented. Like there was a fad in those days, Edison and Tesla. They used to commercialize the things. He, like the Curies, believed that this information was so important it should be shared with the humanity, and he wanted to tell everything to everyone so that they could develop newer and newer techniques to develop X-rays and really hone the skill of producing good quality X-rays. And he wanted it to be freely used. And he didn't really earn much to it. This on the left is the first unmodified photograph of his lab, which is on the first floor of this building in Germany. And the German government has maintained it and converted it into a beautiful museum, which is open to public with permission. And they've displayed the equipment which he originally used in a beautiful manner. Now, X-rays form a very small portion of a wide spectrum of a phenomenon called electromagnetic radiation. Electromagnetic radiation is produced by a moving charge. Actually, all the slides in this presentation are from the net. Nothing is original except the small in the lower left corner. This is a comb. I have taken a picture of this comb just because I want to do a thought experiment here. When we say charge, it's something we can't really imagine. But as a small kid, if you comb your hair, you charge a comb and you can pick up small pieces of paper. You know something is there, it attracts paper. So a comb is tangible. You can hold it and you can do experiments with it. And the effect of a charged body has got a very short distance. You can't pick up paper from more than a few centimeters away. So if you go a kilometer away, you won't even know you got a charged comb. But if you move this at a rapid enough rate, up and down, you will produce electromagnetic radiation. But you have to do it real fast. If you move it up and down by 1,000 times a second, you are in business. You produce a radio wave of 1 kilohertz. 1 kilohertz is too low, but if you do it say around 100,000 times or a million times a second, then you produce a radio wave in the medium wave band, and it will get received in a radio set. See, electromagnetic radiation, the lower frequency is called radio waves, then TV waves, microwaves, then infrared, visible spectrum, light. Ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays. They are all the same damn thing. It's just when charge vibrates, it produces waves which don't stay there, they go till infinity. They just get lesser and lesser in amplitude, but they travel. And we have invented machines devices to produce radio waves and TV waves and infrared, visible light, so many sources of visible light, and X-rays, and even gamma rays, ultraviolet, everything we can produce. But we got different devices for each one. hypothetically, if we had an electromagnetic wave generator and it had a knob in front, starting from radio waves, going up to gamma waves, we could have thought better and we could have really demonstrated the properties of electromagnetic radiation. And similarly, I am trying to do it with a thought experiment with a comb. But how high a frequency you need to generate visible light? It's in the range of petahertz. We are talking of very big numbers. And X-rays is exahertz. Petahertz is 10 raised to power, it says 15 here. 10 raised to power 15, that is 1,000 million times a second. If you can vibrate a comb 1,000 million times a second, you will see light. It will emit either red or blue depending on how fast you are vibrating it. And you vibrate it even faster. A billion million times a second, an exahertz will produce X-rays. From a charge, practically it's not possible. You will either break the comb or break your hand or air resistance. So we discovered different devices to produce X-rays. This is just to show how astronomical the numbers are. To denote frequency, we can go from decahertz, hectohertz, kilohertz, megahertz, giga, tera, peta, exa, zeta, and mota. I just call them zillion. So this is just to show that it's just vibrating charge which produces, and how fast, what is the frequency at which it is vibrating. You can produce radio waves, you can produce X-rays, you can produce gamma rays, they are all the same. Okay, now I will jump deep into the nitty-gritty of chest X-rays. And before the end of the talk, these are my objectives. Before the end of the talk, at least you should be able to tell the difference between a PE and an AP view of the chest, and why we get a PE view most often rather than an AP view. And you should know when to get a lateral view or a lateral decubitus view. And the end of the talk, you will be able to appreciate how important is inspiration and penetration and rotation. What are these terms? And in anatomy, I will tell you about the basics of the lung, lobes and fissures and heart borders. And I will tell you about the technique to read an X-ray. It's something which you see a lot. It's something like driving. You see a lot of X-rays you learn. Otherwise, you can't teach a car driving on standing on stage. And I'll tell you something about silhouette signs, about Ben Felsen, and something about atelectasis, pulmonary edema, cardiogenic and non-cardiogenic. And I'll talk about atelectasis, pneumonia, pleural effusions, solitary pulmonary nodules, and how to guess whether it's benign or it's malignant. At the end of the talk, at least these. This is PA view of the chest. PA means posterior inferior. It is the direction in which the ray travels from posterior to anterior. Why do we do a PA view more often than an AP view? It's a better quality film compared to AP. Why? Because the heart is nearer the cassette. That's how the patient stands. The chest touching the cassette, and heart gets magnified less. You can assess the size of the heart better. And standing, the patient, because of gravity, the diaphragm fall down and you see more of lung, and the lung is fully expanded. In AP, most of the patients are sick and they are lying down, and the distance between the X-ray film is also less. So there is a lot of magnification. You can misinterpret a lot of things in AP. And secondly, this is X-ray quality. X-ray quality in PA is better. You can diagnose better. Secondly, other thing is you save the patient from a lot of unnecessary radiation to vital organs like thyroid, eyes, sternal bone marrow, gonads. All of them get shielded by the rest of the body. In an X-ray beam, there is always a part of the beam which is not really required. The lower KV portion of the beam. That gets absorbed mostly in the first few centimeters of the skin. There is no way to avoid it. We use aluminium filters in front of an X-ray tube to diminish that, but it's not really possible to avoid ionizing part of the patient and causing a minimal damage. So these organs are on the other side, and in the PA view you save them to some extent. And these days they say you should not do just a PA view. One view is not enough. Like if you see a bottle like this, And if you take a photograph in a particular way, you won't really know what it is. You always require two views. And I don't know, it should become important always to give the other view. There are lots of things which can get missed. It should become a protocol. And mostly if the clinician doesn't tell us to take the left lateral view, this 14 minutes and the left lateral view, again because the heart gets magnified less. But if there is a pathology on one particular side, you should take that particular lateral view. And how to tell which lateral view just by looking at the chest X-ray. Sometimes there will be a marker, R or L, the radiographer will have put a marker. Then if you don't have that, the posterior ribs, the ribs posteriorly, the ribs which are nearer the cassette will get magnified less, the ribs which are away from the cassette will get magnified more, and they will be projected more posteriorly if the centering is proper. And then the diaphragms, the left diaphragm will always have a stomach air bubble under it. So the uppermost part of the left diaphragm will be a line, whereas the right diaphragm will be an interface. Below that everything will be white because of liver. And one diaphragm will be slightly always higher than the other. So stomach bubble gives it away. And then the anteriormost part of the left diaphragm is not seen on a lateral view because the heart is silhouetting it. The heart is above the diaphragm. So the left diaphragm covers the upper surface you don't see on a lateral view. And PA view, you should limit yourself only if the patient is very sick. Ideally, you should just do, AP view you should do in patients which are sick, who can't stand. And some information grossly is obtained, but see the cardiac. This is first on the upper side is the AP view and the lower is the PA view. And you realize how you can misdiagnose and you can interpret haziness in the lower zone as things, consolidation or prudence. Actually, a standing view. And if the patient can't stand, another view which is possible is lateral decubitus view. In this, we look for pleural fluence in the dependent hemithorax or for small pneumothoraces in the non-dependent hemithorax. They say a minimum of 200 cc of fluid has to be present to see an effusion in an AP view in the lateral costophrenic recess. The lateral costophrenic recess is at a higher level than the posterior costophrenic recess. So in a lateral view, you can pick up smaller effusions, say 75 ml, they say. More than 75 ml in a lateral view, you will pick up. If it's smaller than that, you can get this view done, lateral view done. Or you can get an ultrasound done. Ultrasound these days is much better. And this should, then technical adequacy. I'll talk about inspiration. It should be deep inspiratory. Then rotation, and I'll talk about penetration. These things affect the X-ray quality, whether it's good enough to interpret. If the patient doesn't breathe deep enough, seeing the film on the left, you see the right cardiophrenic angle is slightly hazy. You might think it's pneumonia or atelectasis. But when the patient takes a deep breath, within a minute you've taken another X-ray and it shows a normally related lung. That's the right cardiac border lower part found by the right atrium. And second thing is penetration. X-ray should be well penetrated. The first one on the left is a very good X-ray. The vertebral column should be seen through the heart but not the intervertebral disc spaces. That's an adequately penetrated film and you see the lung beautifully and the heart. And in a second one in the middle is poor penetration. You will miss things in the lung behind the heart, however dense they may be. And the third is an over-penetrated film and you will miss soft capacities. By soft I mean faint capacities, small lung nodules you will miss in an over-penetrated film. Third technical thing you should look for is rotation. The X-ray, if it is rotated to one patient is standing like this, then you misdiagnose. You can't really assess the size of the heart. You don't know whether the trachea is in the center or not. Best way is to look at the anterior ends of the clavicles. They should be equidistant from the spinous processes of the upper thoracic vertebrae, like on the picture on the top on the right. And the lower pictures are a rotated chest. You don't know where the trachea. You can see the trachea. This, for example, this is a right lateral wall of the trachea. And by this, you don't know whether it's really shifted to the left or it's in the center or to the right. And there's another shadow here. This was actually a skin fold. And in this, you can see the medial end of the clavicle. See, one is there and the one is there, and the spine is somewhere else. In a rotated trill, you can't comment much about heart size, and you can miss things in the lung and overdiagnose. I'll tell you something about lobes and fissures. Lobes, first of all, are not lines; they are planes. Like in an orange, there are cortical, something like that. And in these films, I show the edges of those planes. The first X-ray, the E is the horizontal fissure, it's only present. And second thing I want to tell you is that the upper and the lower lobe overlap to a large extent in the middle zone in an PAV. And zones don't confuse them with lobes. Zones is arbitrary divisions in a PAV of the chest. The anterior end of the second rib. If you draw a horizontal line from there, anything above that is upper zone. And anything below an imaginary horizontal line from the anterior edge of the fourth rib is the lower zone. And in between is the mid zone. A shows the horizontal fissure. It can sometimes be seen as a very thin line in a normal chest X-ray PAV. Oblique fissure is almost never seen in an PAV chest view because it's oblique. It's like a plane like this. Right oblique fissure, left oblique fissure like this. So unless you do a lordotic view or you do a lateral view, you won't see the oblique fissure. Left side does not have the oblique fissure or the middle lobe. And the third on the left shows the fissures in the lateral view. All the fissures can be seen in a lateral view. This shows a practical example. There is interlobar effusion or effusion in the fissures on the right side. Horizontal fissure is very well seen, the lesser fissure. The oblique fissure, because it comes from high up and goes lower down, is seen only in the lower part because of gravity. The fluid has sort of gravitated there. Lateral view shows both the fissures, and incidentally it shows the ring of mitral valve replacement and pericardial midline sternotomy metallic sutures. Okay, this slide does not show heart borders. Classically, heart borders, the right heart border starts from above, it formed by the IVC and lower down by the right atrium. Left border is formed by the aorta, pulmonary artery, left atrial appendage, and left ventricle, nothing else. And right ventricle does not form any part of the heart border. What this slide shows is actually interfaces. So there are a lot of other interfaces. The right innominate vein, superior vena cava, of course, ascending aorta, right atrium, and the diaphragm. These are interfaces where you can see the silhouette sign. I'll tell you about silhouette sign. Then left side is innominate vein, aortic arch, procopulmonary window, left pulmonary artery, ascending aorta, left ventricle, and diaphragm. These are interfaces against which, if there is pathology which has fluid, either alveolar or interlobular or interstitial or pleural, it will cause the silhouette sign. Silhouette sign was first described by Ben Felsen. It's in a sense absence of a silhouette. Silhouette sign is absence of a silhouette because of presence of fluid adjacent to and touching, abutting an interface between soft tissue and air. And this slide should go along with this slide. This slide shows what all portions of the lung touch, what all things, and the interface will get obscured. The part of the ascending aorta will get obscured by pathologies in the right upper lobe, by pathology and consolidation or atelectasis. Right middle lobe, classically, that's what Felsen described. Silhouettes of parts. By silhouette, I mean it obscures a part of the lower heart border formed by the right atrium. Similarly, lingula on the left side obscures the lower part of the left heart border, and upper lobe obscures the aortic arch. And similarly, lower lobe, absence of a silhouette sign is also a big thing. For example, in the right middle, I don't know whether you see this pointer. In the right middle lobe, it is a faint opacity, but you can see the heart border very clearly through it. Then it's obviously not in the middle lobe, it's in the posterior lobe, in the lower lobe. And similarly on the left side, lower lobes do not silhouette heart. Most of the lower lobe is lying in the posterior part of the chest, and if there is some opacity, it doesn't cause any obscuration of a heart border, it's in the lower lobe. Lower lobes obscure diaphragms like this way. Okay, how to read a chest X-ray? You've got a film in your hand. The lighting should be good. I mean, stray lights which hit the X-ray from front should be avoided. There should be diffuse lighting behind the X-ray. Ideally, the view box. If you don't have, sky is better than a tube light or an incandescent lamp. Or if enough light is falling in a whitewashed wall, that wall is good enough. It should be a diffuse lighting from behind. Then X-rays should be viewed in chronological order. If you handle a bunch, you should first sort them out. And then you should acquire extra data, name, age, sex, and whatever extra things you want, clinical data. Then technique, you should immediately come to know it's a PE or an AP, I'll tell you how. And exposure location, you should assess whether it's a quality is good enough. Then you should look at trachea, whether it's central or the caliber is good enough. You should then look at lungs. Then once you see a lot of X-rays, you will on your own develop a particular protocol. Then look at the lungs, pulmonary vessels, hyla, heart, what's the size of the heart, shape, we call it configuration, shape of the heart, mediastinal contour, pleura, for bones, boneless bones. And soft tissues, a lot of times, even now, we miss mastectomy. If breast head is not present on one side, it's very easy to miss, unless you look for it. And ICU films, you should look for tubes and catheters there, and lines where their tips are and are they open or not. And then with this slide, I want to tell you that only the central few millimeters of our retina, central 2 millimeter of a retina is really a high resolution camera. Rest of it is very low res. And you have, when you look at a chest X-ray, you should scan your eyes from right to left as if reading a book. That's why I call it reading an X-ray. Unless you look, for example, this X-ray on the left, if you look at X in the center, and you won't be able to tell there is A in the left lower corner and the Y in the right lower corner. And if you look at A, you won't know what's in the right upper corner. So you have to look from right to left. You look at different structures. You develop a habit of scanning in X-ray from right to left. And similarly in a lateral, you should look at different things one at a time in a particular sequence. You develop that sequence on your own. And silhouette sign was first described by Ben Felsen, and this shows a consolidation in the middle of the right heart border was not seen. Had the right heart border been seen, it would have been in the overlap. And okay, then a few signs. Air bronchogram, talk about air bronchogram. The other sign, air bronchogram is when the airway becomes visible, tubular airway becomes visible because of consolidation, because of fluid present, opacification of alveoli around it because of fluid present in them. And in this first X-ray, you see there is air bronchogram. The trachea is seen and the bifurcation is seen, and this magnified view you can see air bronchogram. That just shows there is either consolidation or collapse or tumor around the bronchus. And solitary pulmonary nodule, why is it important? Because sometimes it can be just innocuous, benign, and sometimes it can be a potentially fatal malignancy. They can look the same. One thing is if the patient has got previous X-rays, a nodule which has not changed in the last 4 years is going to be benign. Secondly, pattern of calcification. If the calcification is central, or if the entire nodule is calcified or it's stippled, it's scattered all over, it's probably benign. Malignant calcification will be eccentric, because the malignant lesion will push the calcification to the side. And then obviously the larger the nodule, and you should follow. Actually in CT there is a protocol, and you first divide in CT patients into two, the non-risk group and the risk group. Risk group is mostly patients who smoke, and then patients who have had malignancy. And non-risk group nodules less than 4 mm don't do anything. Nodules more than 8 mm you always follow up. And in a high-risk group, less than 4 mm you follow up less frequently, more than 8 mm you always the same. Between 4 to 8 you follow up more frequently. Okay, atelectasis is actually collapse of the lung or inability of the lung to fully expand, of the lung or a part of the lung. This also shows silhouette sign in the right ventricle, that's consolidation of the atelectasis actually is something like consolidation, but added to it is volume loss. That part of the lung shrinks, and it will pull the hyla and the trachea and the heart and the diaphragm towards it, and the vessels will get crowded. the actual importance of atelectasis becomes apparent when the opacity caused by the pathology is not well enough seen. Sometimes you just see the right heart water or the left heart water not seen. Okay. I don't know. Well, just be a yeah. Sometimes.
We're getting 5 more minutes.
Sometimes you just don't see a heart water, but you don't really see an opacity. You should not miss that. That's where actually the thing, the silhouette sign comes into play. And I'll talk about patterns of atelectasis. The left upper lobe and the right upper lobe collapse differently, and they produce different pictures on a PAV of the chest. The left upper lobe, on the left side there is no horizontal fissure, and the left major fissure is something like that. So if the upper lobe collapses, goes like this along the anterior chest wall. So it silhouettes the aortic knuckle, and it's not such a prominent thing on a PAV. On a lateral view, you will see it much better. This in the inset on the left lower corner, you will see on the lateral view, you will see density interiorly hugging the anterior chest wall. But I'll tell about the right upper lobe, it collapses differently, because right upper lobe, there is a horizontal fissure, and that fissure collapses like this, medially. It is a different pattern. So left upper lobe collapse, if there is silhouetting of the aortic knuckle, you may not see this dense shadow, but the aortic knuckle is not seen, there is something in the left upper lobe. Lower lobes, both sides collapse the same way. They go medially and posteriorly, and they almost never silhouette the heart. See in the first slide, you see a oblique density behind the heart, that's the left lower lobe, and it's in the second film they are treated, and you can see the diaphragm now. The first you don't see the diaphragm, that's left lower lobe collapse, and that's a subtle form of left lower lobe atelectasis. We see an oblique line, and below that the rest is a crowded partial collapse. And incidentally, you see the diaphragm is also raised. In the right upper lobe collapse, the fissure moves medially like this, like I told you. It's much more apparent on an PAV. And this middle lobe collapse. Middle lobe collapse can be missed on a PAV because unless you pick up the silhouette sign and right atrium edge, you can't really see. But a lateral view, it will become dense because the horizontal and the anterior part of the oblique fissure will approximate each other and they form a wedge kind of an opacity. Right lobe collapse is similar. So you can see this line there. See. This is that line. And it's not silhouetting the heart, it goes up like that. It's not silhouetting the diaphragm also in PAV because it's collapsed so badly it's touching the posterior chest wall. If we do a lateral view, we will see it silhouetting the posterior part of the diaphragm. Then this is atelectasis on the entire right lung because of the mucus plug in the right main bronchus. After bronchoscopy, the pull out the plug, and within a few hours the lung expands. This pulmonary edema, it may be cardiogenic or non-cardiogenic. Cardiogenic may there be increased capillary pressure in the pulmonary capillary. Non-cardiogenic will be either capillary permeability, which is deranged, or it will be decreased plasma aortic pressure. And there will be pulmonary edema. Pulmonary edema is seen as a bad skin appearance. That's second slide shows the bad skin appearance. Cardiogenic edema will always have some component of cardiomegaly and capitalization of veins. Normally the pulmonary veins in the upper zones are smaller in caliber than the veins in the lower zones. If they become equal or larger in caliber, that shows capitalization, that shows increased pulmonary venous pressure. Congestive heart failure is one of the common things for which we get X-ray done. First is cardiomegaly. Cardiomegaly appears much more before the cardiac sign. And once the pulmonary vein bed pressure, pulmonary capillary pressure rises about 12 millimeter to 18 millimeter, you see capitalization. You see veins in the upper zones get dilated. Then between 18 to 24, you see interstitial edema. Interstitial edema is seen as curly lines, that is small horizontal lines near the lower chest field. And if the pressure rises more than 24 millimeters, you see alveolar edema, that causes the bad skin appearance. Okay, this is pulmonary edema before and after, dramatic improvement after treatment. This slide, this shows curly lines, it's a magnified view, and those arrows show horizontal interlobular septae, which is got edematous. Cardiac failure and pulmonary edema are not the only thing which produce curly lines. Other things like carcinomatosis and malignant lymphoma, sarcoidosis, lots of other things can produce interlobular edema because of lymphatic effusion. And pneumonias are capacities like atelectasis, except there is no volume loss. Fissures won't be pulled towards them and the vessels won't get crowded, but all the other things are there. Air bronchogram is there and ciliatus spine is there. It's called mosquito bacteria, microplasma viruses. And you see just haziness and the lung mark is obscure, but bronchogram is there. This is the middle lobe first, second is the upper lobe. See, similar area, but upper lobe will not care for the fissure. And in the lateral view, it's apparent above the horizontal fissure. And tuberculosis presents with a wide range of things. Primary tuberculosis is the patient exposed the first time. It presents in a small patch of consolidation called the Bowen's locus. Mostly it's in the middle or the lower zone. And if there is accompanying hyaluronidopathy, we call it Bowen's complex. And secondary or post-primary or ring activation tuberculosis presents as patches of consolidation, fluffy aggregates and cavities. Cavity is the hallmarks, then it proceeds to fibrosis and they can have pleural effusion and calcification later on. And tuberculosis post-primary is common in the upper lobe or the apical segment of the lower lobe. Very uncommon in the lower part of the lung. Pulmonary embolism, in majority of the cases, the X-ray will be normal. The X-ray in pulmonary embolism is done only
You have to the last 2 minutes.
Pulmonary embolism is completely normal. Pleural effusion will gravitate because of gravity to the lower part, CAP and lateral view. And this is emphysema lung will be overexpanded, diaphragm will be flat, and barrel chest in the lateral view. And rib fractures, unless you look at them, you would miss it. The right posture. The CT angle there, the 9th rib which is fractured, you should look for pneumothorax. Pneumothorax is better seen in an expiratory film than anterior. Anterior mediastinal mass is the famous 4 T's, Harrod and thymus, teratoderma and cerebral lymphoma, and anterior aneurysm, aneurysm. That's an anterior mediastinal mass. That's a medial mediastinal mass. That's aortic aneurysm. Other thing, more important are higher lymphadenopathy and medial mediastinal. That's what you see. The posterior, anything about the clavicle always will be the posterior mediastinal. That's one common. And posterior, obviously, neurofibromas, schwannomas, and lateral meningosis. And then the shape of it. Look at the thing on the left. It's the way it meets the chest wall, it forms an acute angle. So it's a pulmonary lesion which is just touching the chest wall. If it is pleural, it would have been an obtuse angle. And extrapleural will erode ribs outside it. Pleural effusion transfer diameter to the heart lower part of symmetrically divided on both sides. Money diet veins. Okay. And this is diaphragmatic.
Would you like to summarize what's the
Okay. There is no thank you slide. And the thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sridhar, for such an exhaustive lecture, starting from the history of Mahavali, Chati, Star, and